President Trump is calling out Republican senators who oppose his so-called big, beautiful bill, demanding they get it passed by July 4th. The Congressional Budget Office now suggests the bill will add nearly $2.5 trillion to the deficit, and some senators say that's too much for them. I want to bring in one of those Republican senators, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, for more. Senator Johnson, thanks for coming on. I know it's a busy time.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So Elon Musk is railing against this bill, saying these types of massive spending bills are, in his words, bankrupting America. But the White House says this bill will actually save the country money. Here's what the Office of Budget Management Director Russell Vought had to say.
I think that it's important for us to get our message out. I think we're in the process of doing that. I think the facts are on our side. The reality of this is we have massive levels of savings in this bill, something we haven't seen in this town.
So Russ Vought says this is going to save the country money. What's your response to that?
Well, they're focusing on the wrong CBO projection. What I'm looking at is the CBO's 10-year budget outlook, issued in January 2017, and it shows about $89 trillion of spending over the next 10 years. Interest in that spending is about $13.8 trillion, or almost $1.4 trillion of average interest. But I think the most devastating number is a budget deficit cumulative of $22 trillion, which means we're going to average deficits of $2.2 trillion. Now, to put that in perspective, Barack Obama, after the Tea Party movement, his last term, his deficits averaged $550 billion. President Trump came into office, had to do a deal with Democrats, so that inched up to $810 billion a year. Then COVID hit, massive spending spree, $3.1 trillion deficit just that year. Now, with responsible leadership, we would have come back down to at least below $1 trillion deficits a year. That's not what happened. We had President Biden and the Democrats continue the spending spree. They averaged deficits of $1.9 trillion. And my problem with the House bill is that pretty well accepts that as the new normal, no matter how you cut it. Okay, let's say you don't add to the deficit. The deficit is going to grow from about $1.9 trillion to over $2.5 trillion by the end of the decade. We're not bending the deficit curve down. We're continuing to let it skyrocket. So again, the bill just doesn't meet the moment. That is the reality that we need to face, not squabble over individual CBO scores. Is it dynamic scoring? Is it static scoring? Again, no matter what the score is, that reality, that 10-year projection, that trajectory is hard to dispute.
The president is calling out Republican senators who oppose this bill. He posted yesterday that Senator Rand Paul, for example, doesn't understand the bill and that Paul's ideas are crazy. Are you worried that he'll criticize you publicly for not supporting the bill?
No, because I know these numbers backwards and forward. And he knows I know them. I'm laying out the relevant numbers, which they're not talking about. I mean, in the House debate, about the only number you heard was $1.5 trillion, which sounds like a lot, but on an annual basis, that's $150 billion, reduced from next year's spending is projected to be 7.3. We went from $4.4 trillion of spending in 2019 to over $7 trillion this year. Next year will be 7.3. 150 billion less is at 7.15. It's barely a rounding error in this massive spending. So again, I've got the facts and figures on my side. I refuse to accept $2 trillion plus deficits, as far as the eye can see, is the new normal. We have to address that problem, and unfortunately, this bill doesn't do so.
Now, you say you've spoken to the president directly about this. What was that conversation like, and do you worry at all about political repercussions for going against him on this?
No, because I'm worried about our kids and grandkids. The fact that we have been mortgaging their future. It is wrong. It's immoral. I ran as part of the Tea Party movement. We were $14 trillion in debt. Now we're $37 trillion in debt. And according to CBO, we'll be $60 trillion in debt just when the Social Security Trust Fund runs out, and we won't have the ability, the general fund, to plus up those benefits. So no, I'm looking at the relevant facts and figures, this massive amount of debt that's only growing. This is our moment. We have to address it. I'm not willing to accept anything that doesn't seriously address this massive problem.
And what's the president said to you about this?
A very cordial conversation. I think he knows I know the numbers. I said, let me work with Kevin Hassett, Scott Bessent. They've already reached out. We'll do that. Again, I want to see President Trump succeed. I'm a big supporter. He is unique. He is doing things that must be done that no other president would do. He just doesn't, again, from my standpoint, we can't fix all this in one bill. This is going to take time. We have to go through the budget, go through all these programs, over 2,600 programs in the federal budget. I've got to believe when you've gone from 4.4 trillion to 7 trillion, there will be hundreds of billions of dollars that if you don't spend, if you eliminate programs, nobody will even notice other than the grifters who are sucking down the waste, fraud, and abuse.
You're proposing line-by-line spending cuts this bill. You've also recommended splitting it into two smaller bills. Are you getting any support for that?
I think that's most senators always wanted that. It was the speaker that kind of talked the president to one big, beautiful bill. And unfortunately, they didn't deliver a bill that actually addresses the serious problem we have. So again, focus on the areas of agreement, do the things that have to be done, budget, defense, bank the good savings the House identified, extend current tax law. Let's take an automatic tax increase off the table, extend the debt ceiling, I'd say about a year, to keep the pressure on to come back and do another budget reconciliation package that has given us the time to win the political argument, show the American people what must be done, find the waste, fraud, and abuse throughout the federal government, and there is plenty of it to identify and eliminate. That's going to take time. That's going to take a lot of work.
The Congressional Budget Office also estimates more than 11 million people will lose health insurance under this bill. Now, your Republican colleague, Senator Josh Hawley, says President Trump told him there would not be Medicaid cuts. How do you feel about that? Do you support cuts to Medicaid?
First of all, we're talking about the Obamacare portion of Medicaid, that for every dollar the states spend on a disabled child, the federal government kicks in $1.33. That's the way it was designed, shared responsibility administered by the state, so they would control it. Obamacare, the Medicaid expansion, for every dollar the state spends, the federal government kicks in $9, which has led to all kinds of abuse in provider taxes, provider fees, overbilling. We actually pay more for Medicaid procedures than we do Medicare because the states have figured out how to game the system and pick the American taxpayers' money or their pockets for more tax revenue. So again, it's completely unsustainable. I'm all about fixing the Obamacare portion of Medicaid so we can save Medicaid for the vulnerable, disabled children.
So, Senator, what do you say to supporters who say this bill is essentially President Trump's agenda, which is what the American people voted for?
President Trump never described the dramatic situation we're in on the campaign. Again, kind of gloss over all these things. People's eyes gloss over when we talk numbers. So what he said he wanted to do is balance the federal budget. I heard him State of the Union, first time in 24 years, we're going to balance the federal budget. Well, if we're going to do that, we have to, at a minimum, take the deficit trajectory and get it downward sloping as opposed to skyrocketing. So again, I think I'm helping him succeed in that imperative goal, which is eventually balancing the federal budget.
He wants this bill passed by July 4th. Do you see that happening? And what would it take for you to support it?
Break it into two parts. Do the things we agree on, as I said, border, defense, bank what savings we've got, extend current tax law, increase the debt ceiling, then come back, do the hard work of forensically auditing spending, these programs, and get serious about reducing that deficit, that deficit trajectory, bending it down rather than have it skyrocket upward.
All right, Republican Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, we appreciate your time today, Senator. Thank you.
Have a good day.